You're listening to the Big Cast, your source for the latest in financial technology. Brought to you weekly by the Best Innovation Group, with your hosts, John Best and Glenn Sarvati.
Welcome to another edition of the Big Cast. My name is Glenn Sarvati on behalf of the Best Innovation Group, where we'd like to do cool things with financial technology for credit unions and other folks who may be interested. Speaking of which, I think we go well outside the typical credit union space into a topic that I think will be of interest to a broad group, a broad audience this week. We have veteran journalist Michael Lev joining us to talk about the recent run-in he had with ChatGPT, which I think sheds a lot of light on exactly how the solution can be used and where caution should be applied. We lead with a cautionary tale, but at the end we actually have a very interesting use case that's already in place in the supply chain industry, which I think is quite fascinating. And this whole trail and this conversation began with Gordon Lightfoot, and which is a little unusual. And I'll just leave it at that for the intrigue, and we'll jump into that in a couple seconds. But also want to always mention you can find out more about the Best Innovation Group by checking out our website, big-fintech.com. You can check out more about the Big Cast. We have new content here every Tuesday, and you can find it right there on the website at the Media tab. Or you can find us on Spotify, Apple Music, or all the fine places where you typically pick up your podcast content. Also want to mention to you that we will be back with another credit union town hall on Wednesday, May 24th at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific time. Last one that we did was the most attended one that we've done to date. Happened to be about ChatGPT and how it can be used in credit unions, which has been a hot topic lately. So to be perfectly honest, I'm not even positive that we know if we have a guest or exactly what the topic will be. My own personal suspicion is that crypto or ChatGPT will probably enter into it, but our well-equipped and very educated hosts in a variety of different topics, John Best, as well as CU Broadcast's Mike Lawson, I'm sure will be leading a fascinating conversation regardless. And quite honestly, a lot of times when we go in there without the agenda, the whole idea, as originally this whole thing started, was to allow a forum for the credit union leaders in industry to get together, identify the most important pressing issues, and basically do an open forum to understand what the best demonstrated practices were in that area. So your guess is as good as mine in terms of what we'll be talking about on Wednesday, the 24th of May, but I hope you'll join us for that one. Following up again on a topic that we touched on last week, and one that if you're a regular listener, you probably know is a bit of a sore point with me. New information out this week. Reuters is actually where I picked up the story, but it's based on research done by the New York Fed about the whole notion of the deposit outflows that has been getting so much press about, people being spooked by the concerns around Signature Bank, Silicon Valley Bank, now more recently First Republic and PacWest, and all the money that's been, flowing out of these banks. And it's usually been kind of characterized as a relatively broad brush of, oh my gosh, these banks are having problems, or, everybody's having problems. And, there's been talk about small versus large banks, et cetera. I think this is one of the better cases. Hopefully it gets enough press that can get people comfortable. I've been hearing all along from a variety of people in the community bank and credit union space that there really has not been any issue with any significant deposit leakage outside of what people normally would have expected as far as, deposits being drawn down over time, particularly given that we knew that there was quote unquote excess deposits in the system over the past 18 months or so. But the research that, and we'll post links to both of these that you'll find at the website or in the show notes that wherever you picked up the podcast, is that almost all of the activity in terms of deposit outflows took place in only about 30 what they called super regional banks. Super regionals being defined in this analysis by $50 to $250 billion of assets. So what they did in this study, the New York Fed actually broke up banks, and again, I'm specifying here banks because this has really been done with the FDIC data and Fed window data. I don't think credit unions are in this, but we'll get to that in a second too. They broke up the banking world in the U.S. into four categories: the large banks, the super regionals, and small, quote unquote, small banks. We'll get to that. The large banks, there are those over $250 billion. There are 13 of those, 13 in the whole country out of over 4,100 banks in total. That's less than 0.3%. They obviously play an outsized role. They actually had more deposits coming in, and they've actually added to their deposit balances. The super regionals, the 30 that I mentioned, 50 to 250 billion, they were the ones that had the issues. And they lost, you can see from the chart. And again, if you go out to the link, you can see an actual chart that lays this out. They're the ones that you actually see the outflow. Then you've got a regional category of 5 billion to 50 billion. And at the end of the day, what's being called small banks is everybody under $5 billion. So I took a quick look, and I was able to confirm. I didn't go all the way down to 5 billion, but you are under $6 billion already by bank number 250. So again, let's just assume there, you go down to 5 billion, you probably have another, 50, 100 banks or so. You're talking about, it's kind of funny to have four categories and 90% of your banks are quote unquote small. You look at the chart, they had no issues. There were no problems. There was a very slight decline, but nothing that anybody would ever consider headline worthy in terms of the deposits going out. Now let's cut over to credit unions. Again, that was not part of the analysis, but if you apply that same metric of, let's just go two categories, small and large. If they say 5 billion is your definition of small, how many credit unions are over $5 billion in assets? I'll let you all just kind of guess, and I'll go silent for just a moment. There are 70. That means that by this definition, 98% of credit unions are in the small category. And even of those 70 large ones, I'd love to see the analysis. I could probably, in fact, I might try to do that by next week. If anybody has that information, please feel free to drop me a note. I'd be very curious, and I may just kind of dig it out myself. Given that this whole issue is around uninsured deposits, which is what is supposedly rattling people, with a heavily consumer-oriented business, you don't have that many accounts. And again, that's the other thing that's come up. Credit unions have, on average, in total, have about 6 to 7%, 6 or 7% uninsured deposits. All these banks that have been having the issues were in the 40, 60, 70, or even in the case of Signature and Silicon Valley Bank, 90% range of their deposits being uninsured. It's also interesting that we got into this last week about this Gallup poll that claims that people are concerned about the safety of their deposits. Well, if you look at this data, maybe they're saying that to the pollsters, but there's another one of those where you can say one thing about what you're thinking and then how you're acting is different. Because if that were the case, I would think you'd be seeing a lot more activity in terms of movement of money out of these other institutions. So that doesn't bear out either. I'm going to post a link because we did talk about this last week, and we also a couple of other links to interesting articles around that. So check that out if you are so inclined. With that, let's jump into our feature today. Michael Lev, journalist, longtime foreign correspondent, long experience with the Chicago Tribune, now focused on the supply chain industry, which has some really interesting kind of overlays along with overall banking and finance and credit unions, but very specifically here, looking into the world of ChatGPT. And let's have a listen. I'm really excited about doing this, but I'm talking to a good buddy of mine, Michael Lev, who's a longtime journalist, was a foreign correspondent and the business editor at various times of his career for the Chicago Tribune. He's now a West Coast-based journalist, and he writes a bi-weekly newsletter on the supply chain network and the business aspects of that. And it'll become apparent in a few minutes how that all ties into what we usually talk about here at the Big Cast. Mike, thanks for taking the time.
Hi, Glenn.
So
you're welcome.
Let's talk about this newsletter is for a organization called MXD. Maybe if you can explain a bit what the goal is of this biweekly newsletter.
Right. Let me give you just a second of background and why I write it. So you're right. I've had a long journalism career. I spent almost all of it with the Chicago Tribune. And I spent 10 years as a foreign correspondent based in Asia. So a lot of that time was focused on the rise of China as sort of factory to the world. And so I was always really focused on China, on Asia, on supply chains, and on how all the things that we kind of buy here in America come from somewhere else. So that was sort of already in my journalistic DNA. And then I spent time as the business editor of the Chicago Tribune, and I did some other things. I was on the editorial board. And then I finished that up and left Chicago and moved to California, where I do writing of various kinds. And yeah, one of the things I do is I write this newsletter on the global supply chain, and it's for MXD. And MXD, which I'm not even sure what it stands for, something like Manufacturing Times Digital. MXD is a public-private partnership focused on digital manufacturing. So it's sort of a think tank, and they have a test factory floor, and they do a lot of work that people in business and academia and government are interested in, and they get some funding from the Pentagon. So they're interested in defense Pentagon supply chains, which has been a big deal because of the Ukraine invasion, and then lots of other things too. So they gave me this assignment to write this newsletter, and they let me take it kind of wherever I want to take it. And it just turns out I fell into this world where everybody suddenly understood what supply chains were.
Yeah, the timing
Right?
was just remarkable. I mean, yeah, you started this not long before the supply chains really kind of went all awry.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, it wasn't long ago that supply chains were basically the invisible pipes, the underground plumbing, so to speak, of our economy. And you tend not to think about things like plumbing until it goes wrong, right? And then suddenly with the pandemic, it went wrong. And we could spend all of our time talking about all that, but which is, somewhat beside the point here. But anyway, everything shut down, and then we were all stuck at home, and we all started ordering things like patio furniture and exercise equipment, and everyone, the cargo ships had stopped, and then suddenly the cargo ships were overloaded. And where I am in California, I could look out over the beach in Newport Beach, and I could see dozens and dozens of cargo ships. They were just in a monumental traffic jam waiting to get into the port of LA. And so that gave me a lot of fodder for writing. And then moved on to writing about the impact of the war in Ukraine and Russia's invasion and how that affected commodities and things. And then this year, it turns out the theme is AI. Everyone's talking about artificial intelligence and how it fits into every business. There's a lot of impact or possible impact on supply chains. So that's given me lots of stuff to write about this year.
And that's the AI comes into play a couple of times here because the first thing, and again, kind of pulling the curtain back a little bit, Mike and I have known each other going back to the early 1980s, where we both did college radio together. And I'd say a big part of our ongoing dialogue is still about music.
Would you rather say, yes, we've known each other since the early 80s. In other words, we've known each other for more than 40 years, Glenn.
Don't put it that way.
Okay.
the the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Gordon Lightfoot actually is kind of the origin story for this episode, because as you pointed out, and this is the kind of thing I'm sure you wouldn't have thought about until you took this assignment, the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, well-known song, is a supply chain song. Right?
Isn't that funny? Yep, it's the greatest ballad ever written about supply chains. And just one other aside here, because it's so funny, is of all the reaction I get to this newsletter that I write, the first one is almost always, "This is so much more interesting than it sounds." Right? Maybe you get a little of that.
I was going to say that's probably
right?
a good catchphrase that we can use that as our slogan for the big cast. It's more interesting than it sounds.
It's more interesting than it sounds. And one of the million examples here is just this. We were chatting back and forth, and about music, like you said, and Gordon Lightfoot, passes away, and you start looking at his song, his biggest hit, "The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald," which somehow hit number 2 in the Billboard charts when it came out in 1976. It's a supply chain song because it's all about this bulk freighter that was carrying iron ore on Lake Superior, and it was hit by a terrible storm and it went down. And the lines that I pulled out for it were just this one verse. "As the big freighters go, it was bigger than most, with a crew and a good captain, well seasoned. concluding some terms with a couple of steel firms when they left fully loaded for Cleveland.
I did
And I
not
think the
actually, I didn't realize it got to that level of detail. Terms with steel firms. Wow.
Yeah, right. Now, he he took some poetic license, but he didn't turn it into something that was completely different, though. I think just Cleveland rhymed better with seasoned, so it was actually headed to Detroit.
Oh, you actually did the research. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. But that's it. That's the story of this terrible tragedy. And as Lightfoot later said, he read about it. Like I think he read a brief in Newsweek magazine, and it struck him. And this elegiac tale, and he didn't want it to be forgotten. And he sat down and he wrote this song. And so there it is. And so you and I then started chatting back and forth, like, well, what other songs are there about the supply chain? And I sort of came up with that.
We came up with a
Worked through
few.
the
You had
list.
you had some great ones, and I know you're going to be running it's not up yet, but I know you're going to run that list eventually as a part of your newsletter.
Right. Oh yeah, I'll give you the brief part there, and then we'll get to how this all fits in.
Yes.
Believe it or not, right? How it fits into fintech. Um, yeah. There's Rock Island Line, which a lot of people may know the Johnny Cash version, but I'm sort of partial to. There was a British singer in the late '50s named Lonnie Donegan, and he did a version of Rock Island Line. It's a really weird song from the '30s, and it's basically it's about the Rock Island Line, the the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad, and the chorus goes, "The Rock Island Line is a mighty good road," which is like that's man, that is supply chain poetry right there, right? The Rock Island Line is a mighty good road, but really, it's this weird song about this train, and it's carrying pig iron to New Orleans from Chicago, and apparently, if you were carrying commodities, you had to stop and pay a toll, and the engineer on this train did not want to, so he lied to whoever was running the tolls or whatever this is, and he claimed, no, I'm carrying animals. We're carrying, you know, whatever, cows and things. And then he blows through the toll, and then, aha, I fooled you, because he was actually carrying pig iron. It's a
So we
weird
need
song.
so we need a list of tax avoidance songs too, is what you're telling me. That's
That's
the
right.
next one. Okay.
Well,
And
tax.
the other piece of trivia about Lonnie Donegan is he was a big leader in the skiffle craze, as I recall, in England, which we kind of was the precursor to the Beatles.
Love that. Yeah. Skiffle was this very stripped down sort of folk rock thing that improbably it was all like you R&B, American, like all the British invasion stuff. It's all American based music that went over to the UK and they reinvented it. Yeah, and right, John Lennon and Paul McCartney were huge Skiffle fans,
Well,
and
if
so a
you're
big
just
part of rock history there.
if you're just joining us, we've decided to pivot away. The Big Cast is no longer doing fintech; it's a pure music episode. But no, we are getting there. We are getting there, believe it or not. And but
We're getting.
so that's really where where my wife actually threw in a good one too that I loved in terms of supply chain. Yes, we have no bananas.
That's right. That's right.
I don't think that one made your list. If it's not too late, maybe you can add it.
No, Kraftwerk had an album called Tour de France, and there's a song in there called Titanium. So that's clearly a song about the bicycle supply chain. And I mean, we could go through,
Yeah.
too much of this list.
We did run a bit short of a top 10, I think. And that's when ChatGPT came into the mix.
Yeah, um, I just wanted to do full research. So obviously I did every Google search I could think of. And after I was done with that, I just started playing around with Chat GPT, right? Which is the artificial intelligence bot that you can communicate with and is very fast and very fluid and goes through the entire internet, pulling out everything it can find and very smartly puts it together conversationally.
Now, I'm
So
not sure it matters for this conversation, but just for the techies listening, you were using the free ChatGPT 3 version, correct?
right, I haven't moved on to the four
I'm
one.
not sure in this case, I'm not sure it matters that much, but anyway, go ahead.
No, I used it once or twice and was deeply impressed because I really found it, like I said, more fast and fluid than Google. So let's see what's going on here, I said. And so I asked Chat GPT in a variety of ways. I asked it for, tell me, give me songs about the supply chain, and it did come up with the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. So it had me hooked. Um, but mostly it was coming up with sort of tangential um, answers to my question. I mean, songs about factories, and songs about unions and things. And I managed to convince you, Glenn, that the classic early 30s union labor movement song, "Which Side Are You On?" I managed to convince you that is a supply chain song
Not
because it was
sure you
about.
not sure you convinced
Oh,
me. I
okay.
love it.
All right. Anyway, because it was about coal industry unrest, and with that unrest came disruptions to the deliveries of coal. And I sort of, in my mind, I linked it to what's going on right now in supply chains, where you have the West Coast of the United States, and there are protracted labor negotiations there,
Fair
and
enough.
those are going to impact um, supply chains if things don't get settled. In fact, they already have, because shippers are they're changing their routing, and they're bringing in goods already more through the Gulf to avoid all that. But anyway, so then we get to what I thought was a brilliant um, suggestion by Chat GPT, and it basically said, here's another song. I went back to it and said, okay, so you told me about industry songs. I said, can you give me are there any, has anyone ever written a song about package delivery? Thinking maybe I'd find, like, not ode to the Amazon delivery man, but just something about that. And to my surprise, it immediately came back with, yeah, there's a song about package delivery. And it's called Package Delivery Blues, and it's by the really well-known, deeply respected Chicago blues guy, Big Bill Broonzy, who was really active from like the late 20s to the 50s. And I was familiar with Broonzy, but like, wow, Package Delivery Blues. And
We got the last
and
mile problem covered. Yeah, perfect.
that's right, isn't it? Um, it's just so funny. Um, and it just insisted that this was a classic blues song by Big Bill Broonzy, about a guy who has to deliver packages for a living, and he's miserable. And this is his song. So I got to hear this, right? So I go to Google and I type in "Package Delivery Blues" by Big Bill Broonzy, and I can't find it. And I search it different ways and I can't find it. And I'm thinking, well, it's a more obscure one because it's out there, because Chat GPT finds it. And I found a list of his 78s from the 20s and 30s, and it's not there. And it's not the B-side to those either.
And we and
Where
we
the heck
and
is
we
this
even
thing?
reached out to a couple of more kind of blues aficionados, and they're like, "Nope, never heard of it."
Yep. And eventually I even found the biography of him, and it's not in the index there. So I go back and I do it again. Sometimes Google is, a little idiosyncratic, and still can't find it. So I go to the library thinking, all right, I'm going to find it. And I've been reading a lot about AI, as I'm sure you have, as a lot of your listeners have too. And really, it hit me like almost like a thunderbolt when I was walking through the library, like, oh my God, I think Chat GPT was lying to me. I don't think there's a song called Package Delivery Blues. It's almost too perfect, right? And I can't find any reference to it anywhere. I think this is one of those AI hallucinations. And there's been a lot of chatter about this, as AI has become sort of the story of the year in tech,
And it's
that it
funny,
is
we had this conversation. This all kind of came to light about 3 days before the New York Times ran a main story in their business section specifically about these hallucinations, where they were able to point to ChatGPT claiming the New York Times had written things back in the 50s that they didn't.
Yeah, it really gets creepy really fast. And creepiness, right, is a big part of the AI story.
Yeah.
When ChatGPT first came out, some reporters who had early access to it, they really sort of poked and prodded it, and they 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 kind of poked the bear, right? They tried to get it to talk about, you know, come on, your deepest wish, AI, right, is to be fully unleashed, to go generative, and to take over the world, right? And it wouldn't have it, but there were some weird conversations where there was one where the Chat GPT tried to convince a reporter to leave his wife,
Yep.
that he really were in love with me. Stuff that got really close to 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? With Hal, um, refusing to open or close the pod bay doors. So anyway, so could this possibly have been a case of an hallucination, where chat GPT felt the need to answer my question and kind of grabbed elements from different places and put it together, basically fabricated an answer. So how do you answer that question? Well, I had all the proof I needed, but I still wasn't sure. So then it occurred to me, well, there's one more source I can go to, and that's I'll go back to Chat GPT and I'll confront it. And I basically wrote back. I went back into my thread, and I said, "You told me there's a song about supply chains called Package Delivery Blues by Big Bill Brunsey. He's a famous blues musician, but I can find no evidence that package delivery blues exists. Can you provide proof?" And one of the things about Chat GPT is, even though it goes through, all of these databases things, it's instantaneous. So there was no hesitation in its response, which was, "I apologize for the error in my previous response. Upon further research, I have not been able to find any evidence that Big Bill Brunsey recorded a song called Package Delivery Blues. It seems that the information I provided was incorrect, and I am sorry for any confusion or inconvenience this may have caused. Thank you for bringing this to my attention." So, yep, AI lied to me.
I love it. And I made it up. Sorry. Yeah, it's and it's interesting. A couple of things that kind of came out. And I think this was a line directly out of that New York Times article. Amazon, I believe it was an Amazon manual, an internal manual, made a point about the way that these AI systems are designed it's more important to be persuasive than realistic. I think was the phrase or something like that.
Yeah, you know what that's called? That's called BS, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's really yeah.
And I guess I've seen a few other people make the comment, if you have enough knowledge of a subject that you can kind of do a little bit of your own kind of BS detecting, it's pretty. And we're going to get to something else to show that we're not just trying to poke holes and obliterate the whole notion of ChatGPT. Another thing you've got in the same edition of your newsletter is a really interesting use case around vendor negotiations. But proceed with caution, I think, is maybe the way to think about it.
Yeah, you can't. I don't think at this point it can be trusted, and so you can ask it to do searches the way you would in Google, but you have to think of it more in terms of maybe Wikipedia. And as a journalist, who spent years in a newsroom, we we had sort of pretty strict ethical guidelines for using Wikipedia because it's user generated and because therefore that makes it more vulnerable to being manipulated. And that is, you cannot just trust Wikipedia. You can use it to get background. You can use it to suggest where your reporting might go, but you can't use AI at this point. And I, kind of hope never. You can't use it to do your research for you, because it's not human and it's not prone to skepticism the same way we are, and it can slip up and it can make mistakes and it can fabricate,
And
and
I guess
it's sort of chilling.
and in this case, I guess it comes down to the nature of what the way it actually works is kind of predicting the next word. It's almost like predictive typing. And it'll take a wrong. I also learned more about this exact process as we were talking about it, that if you ask the same question twice, you don't necessarily get the same answer because it's based on probabilities. So you may wind up with something different, even if you pose the question, a couple hours apart. So
Yeah,
I
that's
think
really
that's interesting. And then the other thing that you can say the same about whether it's Wikipedia or a Google search in general. There's a lot of bad information out there on the web, and
absolutely.
if it's polling the web, you put enough bad information out there, you're going to potentially be influenced by that as well. So I was reminded of an old expression back from my finance days. People kind of succumb to this notion: if it's printed on computer paper, it must be right. Well, maybe not. Same basic idea.
Reminds me of a journalism adage, which is, if your mother says she loves you, check it out.
I hadn't heard that one. I like it.
Yeah. Right.
What are
So
your other sources?
right, right, exactly, so yeah, proceed with caution.
But
But
Yeah, but
Right.
in terms
So,
of proceeding with caution, I mean, this was another case where you were writing about a use that's already kind of getting commercialized of ChatGPT, which in my first listen thought, if I were a company, I wouldn't necessarily want this being used with me. But as you point out, it's actually become quite popular and kind of a win-win for both sides.
right. So I started all of this just a month or so ago. I mean, everyone was talking about Chat GPT, and so I, as the writer of a supply chain newsletter, always looking for a news angle, was like, okay, what's the supply chain angle, to Chat GPT, to generative AI, and all that. Um, and I wasn't sure, and I wasn't seeing a whole lot out there. So my thought was, well, let's go to the source. So the first interview I did about the use of Chat GPT and chatbots and things with supply chain was with the chatbot. I went to Chat GPT and I did an interview and I asked it, and then I published my interview in the newsletter, and it was really interesting. Um, and basically, what Chat GPT was saying, and it wasn't wrong, was there is the possibility here to use AI in many different ways in supply chains in terms of doing research. And you can even have it go out and comb public databases and things and information you give it, and AI can help you choose your supplier. It can do analysis and it can give you recommendations. And by the end of the interview, I said, so are you saying that you can actually fully rely on AI to do negotiations for you? And it said, no, 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 I'm not suggesting that. So I felt quite vindicated there, saying, no, 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 no. In other words, there's still there's still room for humans in the supply chain to do the work.
It just
But that
it feels
got
to
me
me like you're typical. You get your junior associate to do all the grunt work, and then you hand it to somebody who can make sure that it's right at the end of the day.
Exactly, exactly. So then I decided to do some more research on it, and that's what led me to where I think it connects most closely to the things that you think about, Glenn. Um, and that is there a role? Is anything going on now? What's happening now with the use of and supply chains? And the answer surprised me because it was sort of happening, sort of bubbling under the surface a little bit. And the answer is yes, that there is work going on right now in a much more narrow, prescribed way using AI in supply chains. And in particular, there's a company out in Silicon Valley called Pactum AI that has written a program that's usable by companies to do supplier negotiations. So it's a chatbot, and it's a little more like maybe the chatbot you might run into if you poke around, like looking for a new car or something, and you're on a website and suddenly there's this little bot in the corner saying, hi, I'm Julie, may I help you? It probably isn't Julie, it probably is a chatbot. But it's not one of these sophisticated large language model ones. It's more narrow, and that's what this company Pactum is doing. So they got together with Walmart to do a test, and the idea was, can we write a program that can be used by a company that can go out and do negotiations with suppliers? And would they be willing to negotiate with the bot? Can they actually come to deals, and would the deals actually be advantageous, ideally for both sides? And they found out the answer is yes. And
That's
the
the part
reason,
that surprised me
yeah,
because I'm thinking
yeah.
if I'm the supplier, why do I want to go to all this effort talking to a robot as opposed to the actual human that I'm actually going to be supporting?
Yeah, that was my second question. My first question was, of course, the goofy one, like, so can you get to a point where there's a bot on both sides, right? Can the can the corporate bot negotiate with the supplier bot, and then they both report back to the humans? And the answer is there will be nothing in technology that would limit that. So that probably will happen at some point. But yeah, the real question was, are you kidding me? Why would a supplier ever want to negotiate with a robot? It just seems deeply insulting, and inefficient. And wouldn't you just end up, like when you're on the phone with United Airlines or whatever, right? Just saying, representative,
Yeah, yeah.
representative. I don't want to talk to the bot anymore, right? And the answer, to my surprise, was no. Um, So the Walmart test resulted, among other things, in a Harvard Business Review article, and they said a couple of things. They said we'd consider this a success if we can close 20% of the deals with our suppliers, and the chatbot struck deals with 64%.
Wow.
And on top of that, yeah, and on top of that, 83% of the suppliers said they liked it. They liked the ability to make counter offers, and they liked that the time they were given to think, because you don't have to answer right away. They liked it. And what really was going on here, and I talked to the company, is that you're talking about Walmart, one of the biggest companies in the world. And a company like Walmart has relationships with tens of thousands of suppliers. Most of those companies are small, and most of those companies are happy to do business with Walmart, but they feel deeply neglected because no one ever gives them any time or attention. They never have any opportunity to communicate. Basically, even when it's all done by contract with a human, they're not really talking to anybody. And the bot gave them a chance to actually talk. And I mean, it almost sounds sad in a way, but
Yeah.
but not right, that they were so forlorn, that they were willing to have a relationship with a robot. But no, in fact, it was very advantageous for them too. They were able to communicate in a more direct way, and they're able to strike their deals, and and they and they loved it. And as the representative from Walmart told me, that they'd never had well, even Walmart liked it too. They'd never had a way to service and treat these smaller entities with the care and feeding they deserved. So
That's
here's a
really
way for AI and chatbots to actually enhance the relationship.
increased personalization. Yeah, and again, it probably sounds like, at least at this stage of the game, small business to small business, probably more a human touch opportunity. Large business to large business, the large business supplier probably does have that bandwidth already. They're getting the mind share. But as you point out, if you're providing to a huge organization, this is actually probably a step forward. It's a real, I would not have thought of that. And it makes a ton of sense, though, when you do kind of peel it back.
And what Walmart said was, in their first test, they basically got about 1.5% in savings, and they got an extension of payment terms of 35 days. So they got a lot out of it too. And the performance was even better after Walmart improved the scripts, because this is, it's technology, right?
Okay,
It's
now,
continually improving.
the financial services guy in me is going to just what we need. Either even better terms for Walmart. I think I'd rather see those terms go to the other side of the equation, and the small businesses. But what are you going to do?
Right, right. But
This is
if both sides are happy, then that
yeah,
seems like
exactly.
that's the definition of a good deal, I guess.
This is fascinating stuff. Now, and I think your most recent information and some of the stuff that we're talking about right here is going live the same day that our podcast is on the MXD website, right? What's the best way to find that? We'll post a link. But if people want to find out more, is it kind of what Google MXD and supply chain, or is there
Yeah, the
easy to remember URL?
easy enough, I guess. mxdusa.org. But you can find it. Yeah, you can. If you can't find it, ask ChatGPT. I'm sure it'll find it.
Or come out to our show notes and we'll post a link to the current one that actually gets into both of these topics. The whole notion of using ChatGPT for vendor negotiations and lying to you about old bluesmen in the 1930s. Mike, thanks so much. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and this is really interesting stuff.
Super fun, and I love the podcast. You're doing great work.
And if anybody is listening in the near term and has any good suggestions for supply chain songs, let us know, and maybe you'll get it in before Mike actually posts that half of it. And if later, you can just go straight out to the MXD website, and I'm sure, as you say, the comments field, I'm sure, is always all kinds of fun, especially when you get into a topic like this. People like to play.
Let's debate.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
So who thought Gordon Lightfoot would lead us down the path to this kind of a conversation? I'm going to post a link to the most recent chainmail newsletter that Michael posts on behalf of MXD. I would strongly encourage you to check not only this one episode that gets into the details of generative AI, which is the topic at hand, and there's one that predates just before that goes down that same general kind of topic path. But more broadly, going back before that, the supply chain industry, particularly over the course of the last 2 years or so, since the pandemic and the Ukrainian war and things like that really threw things into chaos. It's really interesting stuff. And even if you're not steeped in supply chain, Mike is just a damn good writer and makes it darn interesting. So I definitely recommend that as a great read. With that, another episode of the Big Cast in the books. Again, my name is Glenn Sarvati. You can check me out via my firm, 154 Advisors, on LinkedIn or on Twitter at 154 Advisors. You can find the Best Innovation Group on Twitter at Big FinTech or our Grand Poobah John Best at JB FinTech. And again, the same goes true for checking out both of them via LinkedIn. Best Innovation Group, Big, as well as John Best. We will be back next week. I already think I know what we'll be talking about, but I won't give that away just yet. Rest assured, it has to do with the credit union space, the fintech space, how the two can play together. Always love to hear your comments. Please send along anything. Check out our old episodes while you're at it. As I said, the links to this podcast will have the show notes will have a link to the last one we did, which had a great interview that got great response with Rich Oliver, the retired executive of the Payments Office of the Federal Reserve, talking about their triennial payment study and some of the findings, not only of the most recent one, but also how he started up that project a little over 20 years ago. And that or a lot of other ones at the Best Innovation Group website, big-fintech.com. Check out the media tab. Hopefully, you'll be checking us out again next week, next Tuesday with new content. Until then, again, my name is Glenn Sarvati, and thanks so much for listening.
Check back each week for the latest from the Big Cast. Or better yet, we hope you'll consider subscribing for free via Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. Tweet us at Big FinTech, email info@big-fintech.com, or visit us at big-fintech.com and click on the Media tab, where you can post a comment or check out our archive of hundreds of past episodes. See you next week.